This is the Early AI podcast hosted by Seth Earley. Join us as we delve deep into the passions, expertise, and experiences of thought leaders and practitioners to talk about what's possible with artificial intelligence. The Early AI podcast is sponsored by Early Information Science, your digital transformation journey with design and deployment of innovative technology solutions, as well as Vector. Now enjoy the show.
Well, welcome to today's Early AI podcast. I'm your host, Seth Earley. In this episode, we explore how artificial intelligence and data are shaping the business strategy and operations of the enterprises today. Today, we're looking at how AI is transforming the way we work, from meeting intelligence and productivity to digital twins and agentic technologies that act on our behalf. And joining me is David Shim, who's CEO of Read AI, the fastest growing meeting intelligence platform globally with over 5 million monthly active users and 40,000 users signing up every single day. David founded a location analytics company in 2011, which Snapchat acquired in 2017. In 2019, the business was spun out to Foursquare, where David served as a senior leadership role before leaving in 2020 to found Read AI. He brings a deep background in machine learning, product-led growth, and building AI-powered tools that people actually use. Welcome to the show, David.
No, thanks for having me, Seth. Excited to be here.
So what I'd like to start with, and I know we talked about this in our prep call, but I'd like to start with misconceptions that people have about AI. What are some of the biggest things that you find that people are not understanding about AI today, especially when it comes to how individuals and organizations think about what it can do for them? We're seeing a lot of simple applications around summarization, meeting notification, meeting summaries, things like that. We're seeing some more sophisticated applications. We're seeing RAG, but what are people really not understanding at this point?
I think they're missing out on the recommendation side of things, where AI right now is doing very specific tasks. You bring an agent into a meeting, Reed does a fantastic job, takes the notes, you get the notes, you decide what you want to do with it. Where the future is going is really those agents or that AI really going in and saying, hey, based on what you've done in the past, let me make a recommendation that you probably want to follow up with the PDF of the deck, or maybe you want to follow up with a follow-up call, or you want to bring in one of your associates to actually talk about the methodology. That's where it's going to start into get this recommendation stage, where it really starts to look like more like Match.com, Tinder, eHarmony, like all these different things are going to come in, and we're going to figure out what's going to stick. But I think that recommendation piece is going to be huge. And I think people are kind of ignoring the fact that AI is going to help you get there faster. And then the question is, what are you going to do with your time?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, work finds a way of soaking up whatever time you have available. But I guess if you do it at a larger scale and organizations are seeing less value for, or less, seeing so much of the work that it takes people to do. And one of the things I, have been using AI for is building on my IP and deriving analyses from the IP. Mm-hmm. And someone said, I'm not saying it's AI slop, but it's a lot of stuff, right? And it's a lot of content. And my point is, when I look at it, it's really good stuff. It's really, really cogent analysis. It's really relevant. But I think there's a perception still that when AI produces a large volume of information, that it tends to be ignored. I don't know if you have a thought on that, but what are your thoughts about how people are using it? Because there is a lot of misuse, right? I had hired consultants who just produced AI crap. Right at the beginning of this, they would give me 50, 60 pages and I'd say, this is not useful. Like I can't, there's no synthesis, there's no analysis, there's no creative thought. This is just a lot of stuff, right? And it's not helpful. So what are your thoughts about how people are using or misusing the technology these days?
I think anyone who jumps into it assumes like, hey, I logged into ChatGPT, I logged into Claude, and all of a sudden everything's going to work. They're in for a bad experience. I think where you get a great experience is you understand, like, it's like an intern. When an intern comes in, it's kind of like, hey, wide open mind. They might even have an MBA and they're ready to go in and they're ready to dive into the analytics. They've got some basic understanding. You still have to train it. You still have to get it up to speed. And I think that's the thing that a lot of folks are missing, where it's like, you have to give it more context. I think when we think about for Reed, it's like, it's not just meetings. You have to give it access to your emails, your files, your Jira, your Confluence, your CRM, HubSpot. And when you have all that data, now your intern is learning as you go, and it's
Right.
pulling in from your experience as the mentor. And then when you start to go in and apply that AI, it has more context. And I think that's where you get the value out of it. But it's not plug and play today. It's getting closer and closer where you can easily connect data sources. But you really need that a bit. You really need that methodology or that mentality of I'm training this model to do work for me versus it's going to do it out of the box.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's stuff that people are increasingly understanding. When you we talked a little bit about the idea of digital twins and personal AI, the future of personal AI, because again, when I start giving it all of my stuff and I start, giving it all of my preferences and my thought leadership and my articles, and I have 20 years of stuff that I put into different types of projects, right? I don't dump everything into one project. I have one that's for my writing style. I have one that's going to do analysis based on AI governance and certain questionnaires. I have others that will do proposals. I have others that will do scoping questions, right? So I have specialized AIs, but they will be using different aspects of my technology. And so there's kind of a bold claim out there that having a digital twin, an AI that represents you, will become kind of a basic human right, just like the way people think of internet access today. Where do you stand on that? And what does a digital twin actually mean in practice? And why do you believe it is becoming so essential and so critical?
Yeah, let's start with the digital twin side of things. So, digital twin, in its most basic form, knows everything that you know in the digital environment. So, it has your emails, it has your meetings, it has your messages, all the files that you've created, all the content that you've created, the IP that you've generated. It can't go into your head, but it's going in and saying your digital footprint is the basis to train that digital twin. And now that digital twin knows as much as you do, and honestly has probably better recall than you do. It has better context in terms of it can connect the dots between the different
I
meetings.
certainly know it has better recall than I do.
And so you've got this really smart kind of intern that's going in and saying, like, I got all this information. This is great. The problem that you run into is context does matter. Like having massive context is important, but you also have to understand what's important within that context. So if you give everything the same weight in that digital twin, it might go in and pull something 4 years ago that you cared about really deeply and say, this is really important today. You're like, no, this is not important at all. And so we've actually, when we built our digital twin, we took the approach of like, hey, let's use the full context window and let's see how that digital twin responds versus take the full context window, but weight the most recent stuff heavier because that goes in and says like, oh, the world has changed in the last 2 years when it comes to AI. You want the more context relevant stuff in the last 2 years, not 6, 7, 8 years ago. And so once you start to do that, the digital twin starts to go in and say, oh, it's responding more like I would. It's more thinking like I would. And we started with something really basic. We said like scheduling. When you think about scheduling, you spend a couple hours a week scheduling meetings, especially when you meet with multiple people. Are you available at this time, etc.? The digital twin now goes in and says, I've connected your calendar. I understand your meetings and when you have good meetings and when you have bad meetings. I'm now going to manage that. And I'm going to asynchronously talk with multiple people to figure out what their time is. And they come back and they go and schedule the call. That is something where people could do it today, but asynchronously, you can do it in 2 minutes. And the outcome is so much better, but you don't even know that it's doing that in the background. It's like, hey, I got a meeting on my calendar Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So when you think about the digital twin, it's going in and saying it understands your scheduling preferences. My digital twin knows I hate meetings after 3 hours straight. Like after 3 hours straight, my engagement goes down, my sentiment goes down, and it's not a good experience for me or the other participant on the calls. Hey, digital twin has recognized that and says, hey, I'm going to put a 30-minute buffer here. I'm going to schedule that next. And I think that's the first part. But then it's going in and saying, what happens when people ask you a question? And so the digital twin now is going in and saying, I've CC'd, we call it Ada read.ai. If you CC Ada, Ada will actually go in and respond to a question that comes in. If it's a really basic question like, hey, can you confirm that meeting time again? It'll just answer it. And it'll answer it in your tone of voice. But let's say something more complicated where it's like, hey, what's your actual net price on this product? You wouldn't give that away. So what the digital twin will go in and say is like, hey, Seth normally doesn't give that information out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go check in with Seth and say like, hey, Seth, here's how I think you would respond to this. And I'm happy to respond for you. But can you double check to see if this is something you want to share or not? And if you say no, it's going to pull back. And so I think when it comes to the digital twin, that level of productivity is huge. Like we've got clients in Asia, we've got clients in Europe. It's actually continuing conversations and getting work done while I'm asleep. And it's not just a line, it's actually going in and following up and answering open questions. And I think that gets the long way to say that is like, that level of productivity, we're only in the first inning. And if
Mm.
you have that level of productivity over time, it does become a human right to say people should be able to get their time back. There should get advantage of the efficiency. And I think the best example is internet access. If you think
Mhm.
about internet access 20 years ago, and you had someone like Prodigy, AOL, CompuServe, like these dial-up things are a human right, everybody would laugh you out and say, like, dude, we got mail, we got newspapers. Why
Yeah,
do you need this? And
right.
now what you're finding is people will argue that internet is a human right and everyone should have it.
Right. It's so interesting when you think about all of the nuances to these large language models understanding your preferences and understanding rules. And of course, when you set up a project in a Claude or ChatGPT or whatever you're using, you set up instructions and you set up knowledge and you set up preferences and you tell it the way to do certain things. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you when we spoke, but I was doing a fairly long analysis. I had a lot of different prompts. I had a lot of different content. I was actually having it synthesized from multiple documents. I mean, stuff that really would have taken me hours, days to do, right? And it did a good job, but I suddenly noticed it was not following my file formatting, my Word
Mm.
formatting convention, right? So I had a set of rules. I'm very particular about the fonts and its aptos and its 1.2 line spacing and its 3 points after paragraphs and it's, only use these colors and use them in these circles, right? And I started noticing that, well, the last couple of documents had drifted from that. And they looked like good documents, but they were not following my standard. And I said, hey, what about the formatting standard? He goes, I skipped it. I said, well, what do you mean you skipped it? Like, it's a rule. Like I put it in as instructions and you're to do this. And he said, yeah, I got absorbed in the problem. I got absorbed in the problem like a human being. In other words, it was, and I said, wait a minute. I can't give you a rule, a hard and fast rule to follow. You won't follow a rule when I say this is explicitly a rule in your instructions that you need to follow. It's like, yeah, not really. Not really, because it becomes a less weighted piece of information, right? It's all statistical. And because it was kind of, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but it was inundated with these other pieces and it was solving some very deep problems, it forgot about that, which I thought was really interesting. It's like I skipped it. That's what it said. I skipped it. Why did you skip it? I got absorbed in the problem. Isn't that interesting when you think about it? What is the implication of that for these digital twins?
I think it gets interesting to say it's a reflection of what it thinks it's important based on what it knows about you. So it's not just going in and saying, hey, I'm totally ignoring it. It's saying, hey, I was deep in thought. I was going after this problem. And a lot of the times, it's like when you write code and you run it through a code review and you go and you say, like, this is broken. What's going on? You might say, like, I think I wrote this right. I don't think it's a problem. This is the way I want to do it. It's like, here's a more efficient way to do it. It's less lines of code. It does take a step and say, like, maybe I should look at that. Maybe this is something that is important to me or that could be important to me. Now, as the human, you still have full control. So you can go in and say, like, you could probably overwrite that today from a prompt perspective that say, hey, at a very high level, no matter what, this is the system rule across the board. Do not ever change it. You could do things like that. But at the end of the day, we found something really interesting where on the meeting scheduling side around like 2024, our model started to say, this person shouldn't go to the meeting. You
Huh.
should actually uninvite this person to the meeting.
Wow.
This is weird. Like, this seems kind of rude, right? You're
Yeah, right.
uninviting
Why
someone
don't you
from the
like him?
meeting.
Why don't you like
Yeah,
Bob? What did Bob say to you? Right?
exactly. And we're like, okay, we dove into it. It's like this person doesn't talk in the last 4 weeks in this meeting. Their
Huh.
camera is off. They're
Wow.
15 minutes late to the call.
Wow.
Give them back their time. Don't
Wow.
make them come to this meeting. And all of a sudden, people were like, "Oh, this is actually makes a lot of sense." And they were nervous to hit the button to uninvite them. But
Yeah.
as they started to do that, people were actually getting more time back, and the
Right.
organizations that were using it were getting like 2 to 5 hours per employee per
Wow.
month just based on this efficiency set.
Huh. Isn't it interesting? It's funny, because you're thinking this is an explicit rule, and then it's saying I don't buy that rule, or here's the reason or the rationale for not following that rule, and this is why I think it's better. It didn't. I mean, in my case, it didn't quite do it that way, but it was a very telling. I wrote a blog post about this or a LinkedIn post, is I thought it was very telling. At the end of the day, these are still statistical, and they still they're not hard and fast rules. Even when you do try to write them in, it told me that there's no guarantee. Now again, I'm sure there's lots of other ways to kind of try to safeguard that, but I thought it was a fascinating thing. And when you start looking at some of the behaviors that are emerging from OpenClaw and you hear the anecdote of the OpenClaw, doing the hit piece on the programmer. You've heard of that, right? Did you hear that
Yep.
story? I don't know if that was contrived at all, but tell me what the implication of that is for these agents that are to act on our behalf, and are they truly aligned with what we want, or could there be a mechanism to have them act on someone else's behalf? Because
Yeah,
again,
I
when
would
you
say
think about it, who is it? Who owns it, right? Who's essentially? I think I own my preferences. I own my IP. I own the stuff that's in my Claude project. But Anthropic owns the language model, and they really kind of own the stuff that's in there. What's to keep them from adjusting things that might favor them? Anyway, it's a theoretical construct, but tell me what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think one is data portability will become a thing when it comes to AI, both at the enterprise level and at the individual level. So if you are generating content, if you're generating IP, if you're generating preferences while you do work, you can't take the actual content with you, but you could take how you respond to things. What is your tone of voice that you use? How quickly do you respond to certain people? What is the right point of action that you take when something comes in? Like all of those things is just like as a person you would own. So I think there is going to be a level of portability. We're not talking about it that much because we're saying,
Right.
hey, you got to move from OpenAI to Claude to Kimi to
Yeah.
something else. There will be a moment where people say, like, it is a right for me to take my data with me, not the
Yeah.
corporate data, but my own personal kind of way that I work. And the enterprise also has the flip side, the same right to go in and say, like, hey, all that IP you generated, all the emails that we pay monthly to store as backup, all the Google Drives that nobody looks at for 5 years unless we need to find a file that we forgot to get signed, those things will start to become more valuable. Where now the agent can go in and say, the Claude bot, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be called, can go in and actually be, we call it like almost a resurrection mode, where those employees can be resurrected in the sense of like, I can ping them to ask them a question. Why did you give a 25% discount 2 years ago? And why do
Yeah.
they still expect it right now?
Right.
Because if I don't have the right answer, I have to give that discount, and that could be millions of dollars. Or, hey,
Sure.
why did we check in this code that looks broken, but no one's touched it in 2 years? Is there something like those are things where if I'm a former employee, I don't mind you asking my kind of digital twin that question. I'd rather get that than you calling me and asking me at 2 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
hey, how do you fix this thing? And so I think there's a lot of nuances there, but I think the IP will go both ways. You had the earlier comment around like, hey, what happens is your AI is getting smarter, it's starting to recommend things to you, and you might not even know the context and why it recommended you that, but it has its own reason. The best way that I look at that is if you look at great leaders, if you look at great coaches, teachers, etc., they bring on people that are better than them, smarter than them, and they figure out, hey, I'm still a part of the story, but I'm managing this system. I don't necessarily need to be the smartest person in the room. I need my team to be the smartest people in the room. And I think that's what we're going to see when it comes to AI and agents.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting when you think about again the implications. I think I've mentioned to you that I've frequently will I work a lot in Claude, but I sometimes work in OpenAI. And if I start a conversation, or if I start a conversation in one project, and I think there's another project that should benefit from this or has better context. The problem with Claude projects is they are kind of fragmented, right? They're kind
Yep.
of little silos, which I have some ideas on how to fix, but I think it's a really important problem. But essentially asking it to create a brief, right? Asking it to create a context brief about the conversation, about the problem that I can use in another project or another large language model. That seems to have done a pretty good job with that portability, but I know it's not as high a fidelity as the deep mathematical models that are represented, because it's an abstraction, right? It's kind of a think of things as multidimensional, and you're flattening that, right? Because you're translating into language. Human language is very imprecise and ambiguous. They can't represent the mathematical constructs that are behind this very, very sophisticated understanding of who you are and what your preferences are. So you almost have to take the math and move it over. And even model context protocol is, an approximation, right? Because it tries to put things into metadata terms that don't really truly allow that kind of transferability. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the metadata, you make a good point on the metadata, I think is the key. So if you think about large language models today, it's just text. It's going in and saying, let's use meeting notes as an example. If you and I talk, it can go in and say, Seth said this, David said this, drop it into a large language model and summarize it. What it's missing in there is like you want the metadata to say, David talks at 125 words per minute, but when he's really excited, he gets to 175. Even if the words are just standard and generic, now I know how quickly those words are being said. That metadata changes the content incredibly. Like if you ask me a really tough question and I don't have a good answer, I might go really slow because I'm trying to think and I don't know. And then if I look at the facial expression, we take a multimodal approach, but it's like, hey, imagine if you had the narration to go with it to say, Seth asked this question he was really excited about, and David matched his enthusiasm on the response. That's not in any text, but like that's metadata that you need to have in place.
Didn't respond at all and kept a very poker face, right? Or he frowned. I like to say to people can I see you on camera? I like to see your happy faces, your smiling faces, your frowny faces, your confused faces, right? Because that's all valuable context for us. And when the AI can pick that up and integrate that into its analysis, that is incredibly powerful. And that is that sentiment analysis that is multimodal, as you say. So it is fascinating context. And I think I mentioned to you when I was asking the LLM to describe my style, my thought style, my thinking style, my working style, my speech patterns, my tone and voice, it came up with all sorts of weird attributes like temporal density and all these really weird, and I could have gone deeper and deeper and asked it for more nuances. And well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What is that? But it was giving me an approximation of something that it was representing in these mathematical constructs, right? And that's what is so interesting is the fidelity of the loss of fidelity when we go from that one mechanism to another, and how that's interpreted. Again, it's a fascinating space when you think about how these are representing us, and then how they become portable and how we own them and how we can apply them in different contexts, right? So one of the things that there's a tension between the AI that an organization owns and the AI that works for you as an individual. When you think about this, we're starting to hit on this. What do you think about that distinction, and what does it mean to how people carry their knowledge, their work style, their identity from one role or organization to the next, right? So that is that question of separating the organization's IP and the individual's IP and work style. And a lot of times the organization owns so much of it, but it doesn't own your style, your tone, and your voice, right? So
100%.
What do you think about that distinction and how that can be constructed or deconstructed?
Yeah, when you think about raw content, the enterprise owns that. So it's going in and saying like, hey, during the work hours, you sent emails, you created files, you sent over proposals, all of that. I don't think anybody would argue like that is work product for the company. So from that aspect, that IP is available. You could build a digital twin against that IP. And that's highly valuable. When you leave the organization, what that does for the new person coming in. So the new person coming in used to have like a 3 to 6 month ramp up time. They need to understand where Seth or David kept these files, what they were interested, what was really important, who are the right people to talk to. That onboarding is really expensive for a company. Well, now if I can actually take this new person, combine the IP that already existed for this role, I could accelerate that ramp up time. And that's going in and just saying like, let the new person's agent talk with the new digital twin that we just created and combine those two things together. Now it's actually going to be like, hey, I can answer that for you. You don't need to go find the person. I can actually just email that person for you. I can find this file, this contract, and it could be kind of that assistant on your side. So I think that it's beneficial for the company in that scenario. It's beneficial for the new hire. But now, Seth, let's imagine you go to a different organization and now it knows your voice, how you'd like to respond. Hey, I don't respond to emails after 6 p.m. I like to keep my work and personal life separate. But at 8 a.m., I want to send an email right away because I want them to know I'm on it. I'm ready for you. I want to answer your question. So during that time, your digital twin can understand your preferences. Now you go into that same organization. They have people that are super important where it's like, this is our number one client. You have to respond to them. But everybody else, it's okay. Stick with your rules. You might not know that, but now if you have those two agents talk with each other, it's going to build that kind of process, those rules out. And I think that's something where we don't see that today because no one's taking that portability yet for that data set. But I think over time, you're going to see that more and more. And it's going to streamline where you're not going to have to learn that tribal knowledge. You're not going to have to learn like the rules of the road when you go to a different organization. It's going to be laid out for you.
Yeah. And what has to happen for that to take place. Because again, using a tool like your own tool and analogous tools, like when I give Claude problems to solve, I give it access to HubSpot, I give it access to my email, to Office 365, I give it access to Slack, I give it access to lots of stuff. And so it's giving me interesting insights based on that. What has to happen for that to be formalized and structured in a meaningful way that still respects privacy, right? Information privacy. Because again, when you're doing a project, you can share the project, but the chats aren't automatically shared because you have to share them explicitly, right? So what has to happen in the environment, whatever, regardless of what tool works? Does this have to be formalized as a policy with releases, with IP assignment? What has to actually happen for that to be realized?
Yeah, I think with the IP assignment, those are already happening today. Like you're generating content for work. Like if you go into a white collar job, if you go into a knowledge worker job, that is already in place for most employees. I think where you see the benefit when it comes to how does it get more scale? How do you handle permissions? How do you handle privacy? One way to do that, and we've already done this with kind of our digital twin, is you take the native permissions that are in place. So if you think about the native permissions, when you log into HubSpot, you've got permissions that are in place that say you have access to this level of data. So your digital twin ultimately has the same level of access. It doesn't get more. In a lot of cases, it gets less. It goes in and says, when you email someone, who actually has the right to that email? So you email your wife, but that your wife never is in another string, or your husband. Well, that's fine, but that means that conversation should not go outside of these two people. And so now you've got it locked down where it's like it only goes to these two people versus like, hey, this email went out to 42 people. All 42 people have access to this email. These same 42 people were in the meeting. They have access to all this information. Now you've got a system that already says like this content, this insight is available to all those folks. When you think about that data set, I think if you take existing native rules, that's the cleanest way to do it. I think if you start to go and say, I'm going to build rules for every case, I'm going to build prompts for every case, what you run into is the thing that went early ChatGPT, where you can start asking it questions and try to find personal information, where you can try to crack it. Like you don't want to get to that point. So you want to use what's native versus trying to build this ultimate system set of rules.
Right. And then is there a mechanism to activate that? I'm just trying to think of the logistics of this. I leave my company. I've left behind, this legacy of patterns of communication where I've shared stuff with wider audiences. Does that become, I'm just trying to think of what the boundaries of that disclosure and security are. Does it automatically, because it reaches that threshold of X number of people, then become public IP, or is it still have to respect the boundaries of just the people in those meetings, right? In other words, when does it extend beyond that context, and then how does that get operationalized? Because I love the idea. I mean, I love what you're saying. I'm just struggling a little bit to understand what the steps are to put it in place and operationalize it.
Yeah, from an operations standpoint, we've got a concept of like, we call it the OG, which is the original, the generator of the content. You've got the digital twin, and then you've got the admins, the IT folks that are in the mix. And what we've seen when digital twin gets implemented, when it's kind of covering when someone's out of office, where it does a response, you always keep the OG on the string. So when a digital twin goes in and responds to an email, the actual OG, still the original, gets the actual content when it's a sensitive content conversation. So you could go in and say like, whoa, that was AI, that was wrong. Like in the edge cases that does happen, or hey, I didn't want to give that out. Can you please keep that off of the record? You could do that. It's going to get better over time. But then let's say someone leaves an organization and you keep that alias alive for that digital twin for that person. That's where you have it going and you CC the manager. So the new OG is the manager that goes in and says like, hey, is it okay that the digital twin answers this question? So what you're using is you don't want to create a whole new workflow. So we really launched with email because email is the clearest workflow, where it's like, if I email this person, I will get a response not from 50 other people, from this one person. And if that person then CCs a manager, that's fine. They're in the loop of that conversation. But I think if you try to build something new at this stage, it's going to be, you're going to get low adoption. You're going to say like, hey, I got this new thing that buzzes your ring and it does this and you tap it. No, Email's super clear. I think the next iteration is going to be Slack and Teams, where it's like,
Yeah.
hey, someone emails the digital twin on Slack, the digital
Yeah.
twin responds back and includes the OG. So the OG
Right.
can actually be a part of that
Right.
conversation.
Right.
And that actually stops people from asking nefarious questions like, hey, what's this person's social security number? What's their
Right.
birthday? Where are they going for vacation?
Right.
How much do they make? You'll never do that if you know you're going to get caught for the most part, because you
Right.
get fired, you'll
Right.
get sanctioned, whatever that
Right.
is,
Right.
because you know it's going to go back to the OG.
Right. So the fact that the email chain and infrastructure is already well defined and thought out and has inherent permissions, inherent disclosure, inherent IP issues, that becomes the vehicle for this,
Exactly.
essentially.
And over time, you'll get more
Yeah.
complex, but it's like right now, it's not ready to
Yeah.
open up a single person's data on MCP. And you see that with
Right.
OpenClaw today, where it's like, it's a little bit too much. The potential is there, but it's just a
Yeah.
little bit too much right now.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about agentic guardrails. So obviously, agentic's getting a lot of hype these days. You built guardrails into Read AI's approach from the start. Now, what does responsible agentic AI look like in practice, and how do organizations think about what an agent can and can't do? And this is very analogous to what we just discussed, but just take it a step further and maybe talk about other types of agents. OpenClaw is a great example, right? Because it is so powerful, but people are not necessarily giving it the guardrails. What are your thoughts about that whole realm? Because again, just like you have guardrails around employees, you need guardrails around agents, right? Because
Yep.
the agents are acting on behalf of someone. An agent can't just be an agent in the abstraction. It's an agent that acts on behalf of someone, right? So tell
Yes.
me what your paradigm is, or what your thought process is about agentic guardrails and restrictions, guidelines, and policies. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the most important is disclosure. And so when we join a meeting, just as one example, is like when we join a meeting, we join as a participant on the call. We made that decision because we wanted people to know that there was an agent on the call, recording the call, taking notes during the call. Now, you can go in and say, I can use a desktop app and I can go in and record a call and I don't have to tell anybody. Well, the problem there is now the agent has data that is not kind of properly sourced, because we've got 12 two-party consent states in the US, in the EU, globally. And in just general best practices, you couldn't record people without their permission or
Right.
notification. And so we took that approach and we said, like, hey, we're joining a call, but then you also give the ability to opt out. So then you want to go in and say, like, hey, you and I were just talking earlier, we had Reed join the call, but we're doing this podcast. And it's like, hey, probably not. Let's take this spot off the call. We just typed an opt out. It left the meeting. Totally simple to do. So you want to, one, give disclosure, two, let people opt out any time, and then three, by default, don't train against their data. So that's a hard thing, but you want to get the opt in to get trained against that data. So when our users come in and create an account, we don't actually automatically opt them in. They have to opt in themselves. And we get like a 7 to 10%, depending on the month, opt in rate for new users. For enterprises, they turn it off, which is fun, but we'll train
Yeah.
against their own data. So if you take that same philosophy and you apply it to everything else when it comes to agent, hey, always disclose that it's being used.
Yeah.
Make sure that you give the people the ability to opt out of using that agent. And then those two things cover most of the bases, where it's like, okay, I know that Seth is using an agent. It's following up with me. It's giving me some feedback on some stuff. Great. I know this, but I'm going to check with Seth because this one went off a little bit off the rails. Maybe it didn't follow one of his rules. So I'm going to check in with him to say, hey, you sure you want me to write it in this format? And you're like, no, don't do it this way. So I think that
Follow your
disclosure
formatting conventions.
Exactly. So I think it's important on the disclosure side. So people can just kind of react to knowing that it is an AI agent on the back end. So I think that is critical. And then when it comes to like the training, it should be clear if you're getting that data is getting trained or not. So if you're at an enterprise, most employees, I think, would assume that, hey, if I have data and I'm using AI, it's going to get trained to help the company become better, to help my workflows become better. But you shouldn't just leave it to like, hey, you should assume. You should go in and just clearly state like, hey, if you're going to use this service, we're going to train against this to make the models better, to make your time more efficient. And that's the benefit for you. And I will say, most employees, I would say 9 out of 10 employees will take efficiency any single day over like, hey, the old way to do it. And I think a great example is like Slack,
Yeah.
Teams.
Yeah.
People at first were like, hey, I'm just going to stick with email. It's fine. I can email
Yeah.
people. Now it's like Slack is like, you take it away from me, I might switch my company. So I think that level of kind of efficiency people want, and they're willing to take it like, hey, you can see if I'm online or not. I'm always available. Like those things are kind of like risks that you have, but people would prefer to take the risk for the benefit they get.
Yeah, and for for a Luddite like me, I'm resistant to change. I want things to be better, but I hate changing how I do my work, right? But then I get sucked into anything that is more efficient. And yes, I'm joking that I'm a Luddite, but I think I appreciate technology, but as long as I don't have to do things differently.
No, I think that's one of the reasons why we did the email, where we could have done
Yeah,
something more complicated,
yeah,
but everyone knows email.
yeah,
You can work
yeah.
within your existing workflows. That's where you get the adoption. I think that's where ChatGPT and Claude did it right, where it's
Mm,
like, hey, we're gonna have a chat box. Like,
mm.
we're gonna show more value, but people understand what a chat box is.
Right,
You ask it
right.
questions, you get information back.
Sure.
We're just gonna make it a lot better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about AI readiness for organizations. A lot of organizations are struggling with where to get real ROI from AI. Pilots are, fail, adoption stalls, shadow AI proliferates. What do you think organizations need to have in place to actually take advantage of these technologies? And what does readiness look like? I know I sent you a little information about the readiness
Yeah.
stuff we did. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but what are your thoughts about readiness, and where are people kind of missing things, and what do you see for your technology? It is almost plug and play. You don't really need a lot of preparation, but where do you see readiness failing in other contexts?
I think you see readiness fail when it's two things. When it's top down, or when it's IT and admin and you have to go through a very long process. So top down really highlights, like if you saw that study, there's a lot of flaws with that study, but 80-90% of AI pilots fail.
Yeah,
It's because a lot of time it's like, hey, at the board level, someone said you have to use AI. And then the
yeah,
execs go in and say, hey, let's use this AI vendor. You
yeah,
roll it out and people are like, what do I do with this? How do I
yeah,
utilize this?
yeah.
It's very low value, and it's not coming from the
Yeah.
bottoms up to say you're solving my problem.
Right.
Someone at the top level does not deal with the same problems on the ground doing the
Right.
action.
It's a hammer in search of a nail, right?
Exactly. And then with
Solve
the IT admins and security personnel, they are doing the right thing where they're trained to stop things that, have access to data, that
Right.
have access to private data, that you don't want data to leak, etc. But I think right now that's one of the biggest blockers, that they don't move fast enough. So not saying accept everything, because what's going to happen is people want to learn, they want to experiment. That is one of the things, like if you look at all these token maxing companies out there right now, where they're going and say, we're giving our employees as many tokens as they want, and we are actually having a leaderboard so they spend more money on tokens. Like,
Ah,
that's the level of stage that we're at. So if you're an IT admin right now blocking everything,
yeah.
you're kind of taking this point where everybody wants to learn. They're actually
Yeah.
going in and saying, how do I make my work better? How do I make this
Right.
company better with AI? You blocking it is not solving the problem. Now,
Right.
you pausing it and very quickly doing a review to say what is at risk and what are the right guardrails and is this the right vendor, that's the right approach for readiness. It's
Yeah.
going in and saying, like, let's add one or two more people on security or IT so that we can review these things faster, so that individuals can choose what they want to bring into the workplace.
And at least having the structures, the decision-making bodies and decision-making processes for allocating those resources, for making those determinations, for prioritizing what gets funded, where the investigations go, and really harvesting those best practices from across the organization. So you do need to have some structure. We find governance is a big piece of that. That nobody wants to talk about governance. When do I have availability for governance? How about never? Never works for me. Does never work for you? But if you talk about it as how can we accelerate what we're doing? How can we make better decisions? How can we ensure ROI? How can we speed up this process of adoption? That's a different story. That's a different framework for making those decisions.
100%. And like a good example is one of our clients. They're a multinational company. They have product manager in Tokyo. They have a product manager in Paris. They have a product manager in LA. They all speak different languages. All the content that they generate is not accessible to them. They started to individually use our product in different markets, and they started to see other people on their teams using it. The big company, actually, this is a FANG company, they came in and said, like, hey, we trust our employees to pick what makes the most sense for them. We're going to do a review. You want to lean in, we can get this done in 2 weeks, but you got to lean into this thing really hard. We leaned into it. And now they're getting insights from Tokyo in LA that they never would have seen, because, guys, the beauty of it is, like, your meetings, your customer interviews are all recorded, the meetings that you have internally to say what's next steps. Now I can just bring that into the system, and when I ask a question, I can not only just ask my agent, but I can ask the entire product org's agents
Right.
a
Right.
question, and they don't care about language. They don't care
Right.
that you're Japanese
Yeah.
or French or
Yeah.
US. He's
Yeah.
just going to go and say like, hey, here are the top 5 problems globally, and
Right.
this is the concentration, and this is what you should work on. And if
Right.
you want feedback from clients, let me play these back for you. And
Right.
that's like would have never happened had we
Right.
done a top-down approach or had
Yeah.
we waited for IT to decide what was going to go in versus like bottoms up, then they check with IT and then they get it done.
Yeah, that's great. That's a very powerful approach because you're empowering people on the ground who have the actual problems, who are facing those issues, who are dealing with those challenges, and then you're facilitating that collaboration and that communication amongst them. And integration of subject matter experts into the workflow is really what we consider a critical readiness factor. It's process readiness, right? It's like how are
100%.
we leveraging, how are we getting their input? How are we capitalizing it? How do we leverage it? How do we apply it? How does the AI amplify it? And that's what we're talking about is amplification and surfacing of that. I want to talk a little bit about the workforce and kind of the long game. You've seen firsthand how AI removes friction from processes, and that inevitably changes what people do. How do you think about the longer term workforce implications? Where does this go over the next 5 to 10 years? And people kind of tongue in cheek say, well, we're going to have universal basic income. Ha, right? We're not even paying, a living wage to people, right? Left to the political devices and the capitalist drives, we pay people less and less, as little as we can, and it's not a living wage. And then, you end up with people working for financial services organizations who actually need public assistance when their leadership are getting significant bonuses. And that is a form of subsidy, but it's not a form of subsidy that is very visible or palatable. And again, as when you look at the long game and how this is playing out, it's going to significantly change the workforce makeup. It's going to significantly change what people do with their jobs and their time and change entry level positions. I mean, there's a lot of questions around that. What is your take on kind of the future of the workforce and how this is playing out over the next 5 and 10 years?
I think it's going to be a boom in terms of productivity, and I think it's going to be a boom when it comes to developing or emerging markets. And so, taking that example of like, hey, income disparity across different countries, emerging versus developed country markets. A great example is we have a large set of customers in the Philippines and Malaysia. And at first, we are like, why are people signing up for our service in Philippines and Malaysia? This is early days where we didn't necessarily have it in the native language of the website, even it was just an English website. Maybe you use your browser to change the language. Like, this is interesting. What we found out was these were executive assistants that were virtual executive assistants because in Philippines and in Malaysia, they have a large English speaking contingent that speak very perfect English. And so they get recruited to go in and be virtual assistants for these developed markets, especially specifically in the US. They started to use our products so they could be in multiple meetings at multiple times. They went in and said, like, hey, I used to go to meetings and I would have to be the person that took the notes. Now I've got AI taking the notes, giving me the summary, letting me understand what the follow-up and action items are. Now I can bring on more clients and now I can make more money and I can give jobs to other people that do not have that ability today because there wasn't enough work. So in that specific example, I think humans or humanity will find a way to go in and say like, hey, this is going to lift us up. This is a competitive advantage. How do I now leverage this? In Brazil, we're the number one meeting note taker, where we don't have a team in Brazil. We don't have a single person that speaks Brazilian Portuguese within our organization, but we've been able to scale out because we deliver a product in that market for that use case. In Colombia, we have 1 to 2% of the population using our product in any given month. Like we have certain universities where almost every student records every single call, every single session or a class they've taken, and they created this kind of database of these folders where they're sharing this information with each other. So you missed a class, hey, here you go. Here are the things that I thought was interesting. Here's where people were paying attention, and it's all automated. And I think that's where you're seeing is it's almost the great leveling of the entire economic structure where it's like people who have access to AI are going to be just as competitive and even where whatever market you're in. And I think that gets me excited because that goes in and says, hey, everybody's got a shot. If you have a computer, if you have access to AI on a phone or something else, you have a shot to be just as strong, just as affluent, just as educated as anybody in the developed markets. And I think that is the great level playing field.
Interesting. It's a hopeful way to look at this. Right. And, it's interesting in terms of how we're seeing things play out, but there will be disruption, when you look at the number of jobs that are about people driving, cars and trucks, right? And
Yeah.
that's increasingly automated. It's going to be a big displacement. I mean, there's no question about it. And my fear is we're going to have a lot of those folks relegated to the lowest common denominator of the things that the machines cannot do, picking and packing and shopping and task rabbiting and things that are less feasible, although there's been some interesting workarounds with machines hiring task rabbits to do things for them. It's very, very interesting. Yeah, still TBD, but it's a hopeful perspective that you have. So looking ahead, where do you see Read AI going? And more broadly, what should business leaders be paying attention to as agents become more capable and more embedded in how work actually gets done? What's your vision of how the future is playing out?
Yeah, I think today Read AI is the system of record for meetings for 5 million plus people, and we're growing, adding 40,000 new users every single day. So we are that system of record. People trust us for our notes. They're building on top of our systems to get access to the notes to put it into things like HubSpot, Salesforce, putting it into Jira, Confluence. We just had a writer at XDA write a story about how they connected Read with Claude, and now it's actually helping them follow up on all the many different tasks that they have. And when news changes, what's interesting and what's important to them. So that's been really kind of eye-opening to be that system of record, because 3-4 years ago, meetings were like Snapchat messages. They were ephemeral. It was whatever you remembered, and that was it. That didn't exist. Maybe you wrote a couple notes. Maybe if you're a reporter, you recorded it on a little kind of handset, but that was about it at the end of the day. Where we're going towards, and we're already started to, is a system of action. So how does AI take actions for you, or how does it recommend specific actions? So that's where our digital twin, Ada, it does scheduling. It's doing really basic scheduling. It does it, gets it done, checks 3-4 hours back on a weekly basis to you. Now it's going in and saying, hey, you're asleep. They've got a question that you want me to answer. I got this. This is a common question that comes up. This is your most typical response. I'm going to send this out and I'll CC you on it.
No,
It's going to
need
get
to
into
wake
deeper.
you up. No need to wake you up.
Exactly. And that's a benefit for all of us. It's like, hey, I don't have to be paged at 2:00 in the morning that something is happening and I need to solve it. Then we're already starting to do this. It's going to recommend that you take specific actions. So after the meeting, do you want me to schedule a follow-up? After the meeting, do you want me to do the research on this question and ask these 4 people in the org, what's the current status on this project? Hey, after the meeting, do you want me to do something else? But even after that, it's going in and saying like, hey, based on all the context that you've connected, and we're starting to do this where with emails, with messages, with meetings, not just for you, but people that have shared information with you, that have shared their folders of content with you, can you actually move deals in HubSpot forward? So imagine you never have to update HubSpot again because it goes from 25 to 50%, 50 to 75, because you've got different people on the team that are kind of including Read, and it's making those decisions, it's moving those things up, and it's saying like, hey, Seth, need you to make this call. If you make this call right now, 95% chance you close this deal the next week for $100,000. Like, okay, this is great. And I've got the full context. I'm going to give that person a call right now. And I think that's where Read is aiming to go to. And we're already seeing that with the adoption that we're seeing with Ada. And I think the cleanest stat that we have with Ada is, even we declared that it's an AI agent, 25% of people still say thank you every time it completes a task. And so it's going in and saying, like, from a human nature perspective, you actually find value in what the AI is giving you, that you're actually saying thanks.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I tend to do that as well, even though I know it's using more tokens. Well, listen, David, thank you so much for joining and sharing your perspective on digital twins, agentic AI, what it really takes for organizations to get value from these technologies. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into the Early AI podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more conversations on how AI is shaping the future of business. And people can find you at we'll put your LinkedIn information in the show notes, and they can find you at read.ai.
Yep, read.ai.
Read.ai. Okay. Well, again, David, thank you so much for your time and really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. Thanks, Seth. Appreciate it.
Excellent. All right. We will talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us on another deep dive into AI innovation. Tune in next time when we introduce another industry expert and discuss how to maximize AI in your world. The Early AI podcast is sponsored by Early Information Science and Vector. To learn more, visit early.com. That's EARLEY.com. Thank you for tuning in.